I'll kick it off with what Cyan Research does. And while we do put on COFES, we are first and foremost a think tank, and what we study is what customers are thinking. Not just customers from the vendor community, but mostly customers from the user community. And what we are trying to learn typically is attitudes, what customers are going to be doing, what they're thinking about, and what they're thinking about spending. The data that I have to show you here mostly is from the data that we published in January from our 2013 research, and a little bit about the research that's currently in progress that we are collecting data through July. And if any of you would like to have your customers participate in that survey so we can get better and richer data, let me know and I'll create access codes for you to distribute to your customers. So the survey that we do, we use SurveyMonkey as a mechanism, and the survey takes about 40 minutes for a customer to complete, and half of that time is spent providing context for the responses that we care about. Because we do not have a random statistically normalized sample, we have to understand who is responding and what is about them before we can interpret actually what they're saying. So in 2013, we looked at these areas, and I'll dive into them. In 2014, our current survey, we also continue to look at the economic output and spending priorities, but our focus turns on how customers differentiate among how they compete with their competitors, and how they differentiate when they choose the software to support their design efforts to compete with their competitors. I'm going to fly through this. I'm going to fly through this and highlight some of the things that we've found and some of the differences. And these differences and all of this data is in the report that is available. We will make it at cyanresearch.com/whitepapers. You can see the report, the executive summary there now, and in January we will make it available free to all. Today you can see the reports from prior years there. But one of the questions that we have been asking for a while is, have you switched CAD software or CAD systems recently? And if you did, when did you switch? What did you switch to and from, and what drove the business decision? This is the area we talk about stickiness. What keeps people tied to software? And among those that have switched recently, one of the observations that we have is those from Asia Pacific, or our respondents from Asia Pacific, when we normalize the data, are much more likely to have switched than those from EMEA, who were more likely to have switched than those from the Americas. Now, if we look instead about the Americas versus the rest of the world, you can see a number of different industry sectors where those industry sectors showed particular differences between what happens here in the US and what happens in the rest of the world. And the biggest differences were the two on industrial design and research and development down at the bottom. Now, among those that did switch, we asked about what drove the decision to switch. And it was fairly equal when we grouped them into what the software can do, whether they had a choice or not, and other aspects. Cost was only about 1/10 of the respondents. But when we look at what those capabilities, what those categories really mean, what the software can do, a quarter of those that switched said that the capabilities of the software were the reason. And 1/10 said it was ease of use issues. And then the other issues in that blue category are quality and reliability, performance and efficiency, and interoperability. On the no real choice, 1/5 said that alignment with customers was the key reason that they switched. End-of-life issues, consolidation, corporate mandates, cost and maintenance were the green issues. Among the other, there was this category called buzz or perceived industry trends. By the way, these are my coding for text responses that made the most sense in terms of interpreting the actual written response. And there were a significant number of those who switched to Revit because of what they said we needed to, because that's what the industry is going, that we're dealing with, most of those from the AEC side. Now, another way we asked the question was, why did you switch? Or excuse me, what's keeping you from switching? What's keeping you from switching to another CAD software? And the first response option that we gave them is, we don't want to switch because we're happy with what we've got. And you'd expect that that would be pretty high. And we have relatively consistent results. 2010 and 2013, 70% are happy with what they have, which is a really nice number. But what that means is that 30% are not happy. And among US-based respondents from mid-sized firms, that's 200 million to 1.5 billion, there was a significant increase in the last 3 years, basically doubling the percentage that are not happy with their existing software. Now, when we take a look at the happy versus not happy, same data looking across geographies, those in Asia Pacific were most likely to be not happy, and that might be consistent with the data on those from Asia Pacific changing more often. But since those two are overlapped, we don't know whether that actually has all been absorbed. Now, among those that were not happy, cost, legacy, and lock-in were issues. Cost and legacy were about equal at 50%. But if we break this down, the cost issues were cost to train and retrain staff, that's 42%, and cost to validate additional existing projects, that's 28%. Too much legacy data to convert is 42%. Too much customization, 22%, and then that pink area, our customers dictate which CAD systems we use, 23%. Now, we also asked about, and we've continued to ask about this, when am I better off with best-in-class, or am I better off with a well-integrated software? And we've asked this question many years in many different groups in many different ways. And one interesting observation about the data that came in this year was a look at what's happening in respondents from China versus respondents from everywhere else. And the way to interpret this is, we've got 3 different categories for preferences: cross-disciplinary design, design and simulation analysis, design space exploration. And for each of those areas, the darkest colors are a strong preference, the lighter colors are a normal preference, red is best in class, and green is best integrated. And this was a huge difference between the two. So the question becomes, why are those in China much more likely to prefer best in class? We also looked at technology engagement. Brown is, we're not paying attention to that, we are not going to deploy that technology. The pink is, we're not paying attention, green is paying attention, and the blue is actually deploying. We looked at cloud, we looked at deployment of apps for different purposes, we looked at social networking, various aspects of that, and also for platforms, and we looked at platforms over time. This was an interesting result looking at SharePoint penetration has been relatively stable among our survey respondents for the last 4 years, with a huge change in Windows 7, and we will see what happens with Windows 8 when we come back to this in an odd year. And we have a whole bunch of different types of categories that we have been tracking the data on penetration and observation. We can break all of these down by country, by income, by number of employees, by products that they use, and so on. New this year was a discussion of silo coordination. And we were wondering, for those that have products that incorporate electronics into their products or that incorporate software embedded in their products, how do they maintain that coordination? So for the next few slides, I've got brown and electronic stuff on the left and purple and the software stuff on the right. And we have this shown down that for small firms, that's less than $30 million, half of the firms based in the US in manufacturing sectors do not embed electronics into their products, and 3/4 don't embed software. When we get to large firms, those numbers are significantly different. Also, we looked at the process that they use for coordinating among this, and it's a little bit hard to digest, but I'll point here, this brown area here and this purple area here are firms that use the same integrated process for what they do. The next one, the darker blue, is they use different but tightly coupled processes. The light blue, they use coordination only at project milestones, and the orange is released to manufacturing, with black being something other than that. We also asked for the first time about what percentage of the business day for our respondents is spent on work away from their desk, and just to get an understanding of what the environment is that they're looking at. And this is an interesting chart, but it's hard to interpret, so let me help you with it. So we have respondents from C-suite, respondents from other senior management roles, respondent from design and engineering, which was probably 3/4 of our respondents, and those with manufacturing roles. And the way to interpret this is, for those in design and engineering, in the green here, 40% of those individuals spend 20 to 39% of their way out of the office. So another way to look at that is away from their desk. Another way to look at that is with those with design and engineering roles, 60% spend less than 40% of their time away from their desk. But there are regional differences here, particularly between US, EU are similar, but CIS, that is the Russia and many of its other Russian-speaking organizations have a very different profile, and I am running out of my time, so I will speed through here. All of the slides that I have here, including the ones that I dropped out of this to make it fit into 12 minutes, will be available in the slide deck for you after COFES, but you'll need your login in order to get that. In terms of spending priorities, we have continued to see that additional seats of software and extra capability in simulation is the number one on where I would spend marginal dollars. And in the new data that we're collecting, it's consistent. Those two things are still at the top of the list. And if we look at spending properties, we can see some unique areas that different regions actually have a significantly larger interest in than others. And if we look at software as part of other spending, including training and education and hardware consistently comes in along with training and education as much more important than the future spend for software and the current data, which is dirty and rough and whatever, but it's still consistent with what we've seen in the past. And that's all I have time to talk about here. I'd be happy to, at any point in time, go over any of this in way too much detail. But from here, we go to Kambashi for the next presentation.